Assalamu alaikum. We're back on the live transmission of the OIC summit that is being held, and of course it's being expected that it will be attended by OIC diplomats from US, Germany, Japan, EU, Australia. The last OIC summit, of course, was held in 1974 under the chairmanship of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Let's look at a package of the last OIC summit and when that took place.
My dear friends and brothers, see the difference today. Look where we stood 25 years ago and see where we stand today. 25 years ago, we were the objects of ridicule and of humiliation. We were thought to be a poverty-stricken people who would never emerge to assert their rights. And that is why usurpation took place. And that is why injustice of the worst form was perpetrated against Muslim lands and against Muslim people. We have traveled a great distance. But yet we have to travel much more, a great deal more, before we can attain our sublime and just objectives. We have no doubt in our minds that inescapably, irresistibly, inevitably, these objectives will be achieved, no matter who is pitted against the forces of Islam. This is not a new challenge that Islam faces. From its birth, from its inception, Islam has faced one challenge after another. Yes, there have been setbacks. There have been terrible setbacks. But having faith in Almighty Allah and being guided by His wisdom and by His holy scriptures, we can never lose confidence in ourselves, in our cause, and in our future. On behalf of my poor people, I am beholden to you. I am ashamed of not being able to provide with the proper facilities. It has been a source of embarrassment to us that kings and monarchs and friends and presidents have come to the city of Lahore, where we have not been able to make adequate arrangements for you. If there have been any shortcomings, any awkwardnesses, please forgive us. Because in our heart and with all our soul, we wanted to give you the reception of brothers, which you are, and which you have always been, and which you shall always remain.
We have with us Aizaz Chaudhry, who's a former ambassador. We'll be talking to him about what Pakistan, of course, hopes to achieve by the OIC summit, the reaction of the international community, the way that we feel the international community is now rallying, perhaps rallying towards the cause, the Afghani cause, which, of course, is the core issue as far as the summit is concerned. Ji, Aizaz Sahab, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Ji, overall, how do you see the summit and the effects overall that Pakistan hopes to achieve from the summit and the overall reaction of all the participants? We have delegations coming from all over. What are your thoughts on that?
As you know, this is not a summit. This is a extraordinary meeting of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC countries, and its one item agenda is to focus on addressing the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan that has reached alarming proportion, and the whole world is now talking about it. And Pakistan took the initiative because Afghanistan is next door, And if Afghanistan is not peaceful, Pakistan cannot remain peaceful. And born of this conviction, Pakistan has taken the step to organize this ministerial conference, which is extraordinary ministerial conference. You would recall you now was showing the clip of 1974 summit we
Ji,
hosted.
ji,
I,
ji.
I want to tell you the last extraordinary meeting of foreign ministers on Afghanistan was in 1980,
1974.
and that
Okay.
also was hosted by Pakistan. So Pakistan has
Okay.
always been taking lead on finding ways to bring peace and prosperity to Afghanistan. And do hope that with this assembly of foreign ministers, they will put their heads together and find ways to help their Afghan brothers and sisters who are up against a very difficult challenge of falling, of growing poverty lines, uh, poverty levels, and also a serious humanitarian crisis because there is no cash in the banks. There are ways to pay salaries to soldiers and
Aizaz,
civil servants.
overall, as far as the issue of international community is concerned, we've seen the Prime Minister talk about how important it is for the world to support Afghanistan for just the fact that it is a humanitarian crisis, and the world needs to rally together as far on the issue of Afghanistan and the fact that the women and the children and the suffering there at this time. How do you see? Do you feel that has changed, because of the efforts, of course, Pakistan has made also. Our Foreign Office, our Foreign Minister, our Prime Minister has again and again talked about how important it is for the world to extend itself. Do you think that has changed the overall, perhaps changed the overall attitude of the world, and this summit and the attendance of it is perhaps reflective of that?
Let's hope so. You see, all stakeholders will have to play a part. Uh, mm, we have been calling on the United States to stay engaged. And I think United States is the most important interlocutor. They need to unfreeze the funds that belong to Afghan people. They need to allow the international financial institutions to resume their work and assistance to Afghanistan. We need to give confidence to the banks in Afghanistan, and we need to find ways to get exemptions from the sanctions regime that has been imposed on the Taliban government, because of which many governments are not dealing with them directly. Now,
Do you think that so how do you think that the way, of course we saw what happened as far as the letters of the different senators in the US on the issue of Afghanistan also, that's also a very recent development. Do you think that perhaps there is a change there, there is a certain thawing there, maybe a little sympathy also?
I do see that, though it is too little.
Okay.
I do see that US has pledged some humanitarian assistance. I understand World Bank has also been contemplating extending some help, but it is still not enough, because UN
Of
humanitarian
course.
agencies like World Food Program are already there, but they need to find banking channels to get the funds to them. And therefore, yes, it is changing, but not so much. I know congressmen have and women have written letters. I know that some noted thought leaders in the US have published a collective article in the Atlantic Council, and all this is building pressure.
Right.
I hope it works that way. But then there are other interlocutors, like the
Right.
Muslim world. They need to step forward too, and that's why this conference is important, because Afghanistan is a Muslim country. And Muslim world must also find ways to extend help and assistance to their Afghan brothers and sisters. That's why this is most important, because you can't keep on depending only on the West. I think the Muslim world needs to play its part.
Fair enough. I think you're right. But, as far as the Muslim world is concerned, which are some of the countries you feel are, of course, it's happening. It's an initiative that's been taken also because of the Saudi Arabians. But overall, how do you see the Muslim world? Like you said, it needs to make more effort. It needs to be there for its Muslim brethren in Afghanistan. But what other countries do you think are perhaps taking a more central role other than Pakistan and Saudi Arabia now, of course?
One complication that I see is the UN sanctions regime on the Taliban. So that means that people will have to find a special purpose vehicle to carry the funds that are pledged by Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia and others. But at the same time, my apologies, at the same time, some kind of trust fund could be created, and we could approach the United Nations to get exemption to operate it, so that it can function as a main channel for funding the humanitarian activities inside Afghanistan. So my sense is that there are enough willing and rich and generous countries within OIC, Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Malaysia and many others, as well as Pakistan itself. I think who have been keen to help their Afghan brothers and sisters, and my sense is that they will be forthcoming. We need to find a proper vehicle, as I said, which can avoid the sanctions and also then channel all the funds to humanitarian activities in Afghanistan.
And of course, there's a strong hope that this will lead to concrete steps rather than just commitment from the Islamic countries also.
I agree with you. In fact, I will go a step further. I would say that not only concrete steps, but also to walk the talk, to implement whatever pledges have been made and agreements have been concluded. Yeah.
Right. And overall, as far as the Taliban are concerned, there has been, I want your opinion on the fact that, of course, there's been some discussion on the other Taliban, the previous Taliban, the old Taliban, so to speak, and these Taliban, and the concern of the international community overall of whether they will then honor their promises, as far as these Taliban are concerned, and the promises that were made, the fact that, of course, they said that the more enlightened, them being more enlightened than the previous ones.
There is an expectation from of the international community, of the regional countries, and of course of Pakistan, that the Taliban government in Kabul would honor the commitments that it had made, that it will show progress towards forming an inclusive political setup of respecting human rights, especially allowing the women to work and to study and to move around. They would also not allow any terrorist entities to take roots in Afghanistan and then use that space against other countries. Now, all these commitments, we see some steps have been taken by the Taliban government, but frankly, I think they need to do more. I think they need to do more. And then,
of course, the expectation, like you mentioned, you're saying that education of the women and children, also, is something that is of concern, has been to the world all over. And we haven't seen significant inroads being made to that.
I would tend to agree with that, because I think people expect the Taliban government to not repeat what their government was doing in late 1990s. The world now has a very strict monitoring of all that they are doing, and their recognition and the normal business with them depends on how they make progress on these all
what
these.
What is behind, in your opinion, what is behind this? What can one call it? Reluctance, delay? Is it an issue of their own belief, or is there something more to it? Are they expecting the world to perhaps take the first step as far as we talk about unfreezing their assets is concerned? All of those things are concerned. What is behind the reluctance to allow these to take these measures, which they have said that they will in due course?
I think two reasons. One, within the Taliban setup, like any organization which has been fighting war, there will be groups, some hardliners who would like to go the old ways, and there will be liberals who would like to adapt to the new world.
Okay.
The second reason is that the Taliban government is also expecting the international community to be more forthcoming, to engage with them, to recognize that they have difficulty, not to impose economic coercion against them. I think that's also a very valid expectation that the Taliban government has. So both sides will need to make progress by moving forward so that the end result is a peaceful and stable Afghanistan.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us. We will now go to a report on this, what's as far as the situation in Afghanistan is concerned as of now, the condition of the women, the children, the overall humanitarian crisis there.
As Afghanistan descends into starvation, universal poverty and death, international community has put its moral obligation towards Afghans at back burner, and instead of incentivizing Taliban regime to fulfill human rights obligations, intervening powers are punishing Afghan civilians by economic starvation. Women's rights advocate Jamila Afghani noted in a conversation with the Swedish committee that we are not supporting Afghan women by starving them. The silver lining is that the Taliban are gradually enacting progressive reforms to ensure the regional and global actors that the ruling group is cognizant of fundamental human rights. The group declared a general amnesty for all, including rival factions, after ascendance to power. The latest decree took a firm stand against forced marriages and tribal customs treating women as property, a step hailed as phenomenal by rights advocates. Marking another step forward, Taliban leadership has stated that they have ordered Afghan courts to treat women fairly, especially widows seeking inheritance as next of kin. Saeed Khosti, a spokesperson for the Interior Ministry, struck optimistic tone by stating that all the universities and schools will be reopened and all the girls and women will return to school and their teaching jobs soon. Taliban rule has sparked hopes of peace as the villages that once bore the brunt of Afghanistan's frontline fighting, cycle of air attacks, gun battles and funerals are tranquil. While warning against abandoning Afghans, UN envoy Deborah Lyons emphasized that the Taliban have recognized the concerns raised by international community and are trying to address them.
Right, we have with us Usman Chohan, who is an economist. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been talking about the issue, of course, of Afghanistan related to the OIC meeting. And of course, the economic crisis there. How do you see the situation? Of course, we know things are at a standstill as far as the issue of funds is concerned. We've seen some help come from Muslim countries. Pakistan also has given what we could. But overall, do you feel the situation is likely to improve from, of course, the reaction of the international community, also the attendance of it as far as the OIC is concerned?
Absolutely. And the reason I feel more confident is because the bar is very low.
Okay.
The bar is very low because right now, as your report has rightly stated, as other people are also giving us from news on the ground, we're in a state of almost universal poverty.
Okay.
In Afghanistan, and universal poverty is something very rarely seen in a society, especially when armed conflict is not there. So when you have universal poverty where 98% of people are about to go hungry in a tough winter with very few avenues of recourse and economic empowerment, then naturally one is inclined to think that things are only going to get better from so low a bar. Okay. That said, how soon and with how much suffering, that is to be determined by the initiative of the Afghans, as well as neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan's initiatives to help stabilize a neighbor and help to make it a decent regional environment where people can begin their lives anew after having spent so long, so many decades in uncertainty and overt and covert violence.
Okay. Usman, let me go to Musharraf Zaidi. Also, we have with him, he's also with us, he's a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us. Musharraf, we'll be talking about, of course, the humanitarian crisis, and Usman was just saying that, of course, it is the bar is very low because the things, as far as things are concerned, they're so bad that the only other option, of course, one hopes is that they will get better for the people there. But how do you see the situation as far as the international community is concerned? Do you think that there is a certain, I mean, we've seen a kind of disregard, we've seen you know, the international community perhaps could have reacted in a more, could have empathized more with the situation in Afghanistan?
I think it still has a chance to do that, but I agree the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan deserves a lot more attention. And I think it's a really good step that the OIC is meeting in this extraordinary session that has been arranged. I think one has to applaud the leadership of the OIC, and particularly, as we all know, Saudi Arabia is a really vital country at the OIC, so it's really good that they've decided to support this. I think it's great that Pakistan continues to advocate for Afghans. But ultimately, the most important decision that's going to be made about Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis and its economy is going to be made by the US. And I think the Americans have a chance to demonstrate grace in defeat, so to speak. I think there's a great op-ed today by David Ignatius in the Washington Post in which he makes exactly that point. He says that the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is not the fault of the Afghan people. And they should not be punished for mistakes made by others, both Afghan leaders from the Taliban, from the Haqqani network, but especially Afghan leaders from the Ghani era and the Karzai era. Those mistakes, and of course America's own sort of miscalculations and errors of judgment, but all of those should not become a reason to persecute and enforce this kind of suffering on the Afghan people.
Right, Musharraf, let me come back to you. Please stay with us. Usman, you heard what Musharraf was saying. He's talking about the fact that, of course, the ultimate sufferers of all of this are the Afghan people. And we've seen the situation go worse and worse, like you yourself also mentioned. But overall, as far as the West is concerned, what about the Afghan leaders themselves? I've also been having this discussion with Aizaz Chaudhry, Sahib, was a former ambassador earlier on, about how the old Taliban and the new Taliban, and of course the expectations of the fact that they would walk the talk when they said that things would be different as far as these Taliban are concerned. The more enlightened version, so to speak, as far as education of women and children are concerned, as far as, you know, granting those working rights, women the right to work, all of those things. Why don't we see, why is there such a reluctance from the Taliban to go there, so to speak?
This is an excellent question because you don't get a clear answer looking at the Taliban as a monolith. Actually, there is a factional competing interest, as there would be in any organization, especially a victorious organization, where there are stalwarts who say that since we have won, we will dictate the terms of our victory. But at the same time, previously the word was used liberal. I wouldn't categorize any Taliban as liberal. I would simply say that there's some more progressive wings within it. That tends to be the younger folk in there who don't have the burden of the 90s and didn't necessarily witness what was back then. So there are vying competing interests within what is not a because Taliban's success is premised on the fact that it wasn't a monolith, that it was a decentralized organization that was essentially an indigenous movement. And so those competing voices are going to be shaped by the exogenous force being the poverty, the famine, the inflation, the drought, COVID-19, which is not even something you see, you just feel that people are dying around you. And these exogenous forces combined then lead to greater antagonisms in what would otherwise be a united interest. The united interest being seeing Afghanistan bounce back. But who bounces back within what is essentially a pluralist polity? It is not really a nation, in my judgment, to the extent that there are vying ethnic interests that also have their own viewpoints, and somebody who could coalesce all of these sub-nations, you can say, to make a true Afghan nation once again, that requires a lot of hard work and a lot of compromise, which just doesn't come immediately.
You've talked about united interest. I want to go to Musharraf Zaidi with this. I'll come back to you. Musharraf, Usman mentioned a united interest. Do you think that, you know, in a world where, of course, all nations have their own interests, dictated by their own economics, dictated by their own strategic interests, their own regional interests, all of those things. Do you think that there is, you know, other than, of course, now that we're seeing this OIC meeting also, the Islamic community rally forth so forward as far as the cause of Afghanistan is concerned. But do you think there is a united interest in Afghanistan prospering after the way the Americans left the way they did? Can you hear me? I think there's a problem with audio. You need to unmute yourself.
I'm so sorry. I wanted to avoid interfering
that's fine.
with white noise. I think there is absolutely a very strong case to be made that peace and prosperity in Afghanistan is to the benefit of Afghanistan, but also to the benefit of its immediate neighbors. Its immediate neighbors are a group of 6 that have been working together really since before August 15th, but especially after August 15th. And those 6 countries include Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, China, and Iran. And I think that these countries have demonstrated, despite having divergent interests in many cases, they've demonstrated their capability of coming together and discussing these issues. I think that the Troika Plus formulation with China, Russia, the United States, and Pakistan coming together despite all the differences between the US and China, I think that also proves that there are mutual interests that are served and that these countries are conscious of those interests and want to pursue them. Okay. But I do think that there's been a generic failure to understand and appreciate the realities that shape life for the ordinary Afghan and the incentive structure that influences and shapes Taliban decision-making and Taliban behavior. So as long as we keep getting our analysis about Afghanistan wrong, all the willingness to work together in the world will not produce the required results. And the required results are a halfway meeting point between what the world wants the Taliban to do and what the Taliban are able to do given the constraints that they operate under.
Do you think that one of those, I mean, we talk about constraints, we also talk about the fact that, you know, of course, the 2 different versions, so to speak, of the Talibans. It's about the fact that there are disagreements within their ranks. And, you know, like Usman mentioned, he's saying that, you know, there is the ones that are influenced by the old thought and the younger ones. But most of them are quite young, isn't it true?
As you know, of course, Afghanistan, Pakistan, this whole region, we are a vastly young populations.
Right,
and so, of course...
I mean, of the 90s, so to speak. The Taliban of the 90s, and that the fact that they were, you know, their thinking, of course, was more conservative, and it's hoped, and it you know, all over the international community, that these Taliban will be different.
So I think that the expectation that the Taliban would be very different, that they would certainly have enlightened, progressive views about women or human rights. I mean, I think that especially when Pakistanis make those assumptions, maybe it's helpful to just take a closer look even here at home. Or frankly, to take a look at Brexit, or to take a look at Donald Trump's rise to prominence, or to take a look at Marine Le Pen. I think that this idea somehow that, you know, the Taliban should be the standard bearers for progressive or openness or you know, values related to or associated with freedom and liberty, I don't think it was ever realistic. And they may be very young, and the vast majority of the fighting forces within the Taliban are young people. But the Taliban is an ideological movement. It's not a, it's a manifestation that has political, realities associated with it. But the Taliban are rooted and anchored in a certain worldview. And so no matter how enlightened and moderate they seemed in Doha, they weren't going to transform into Bernie Sanders or, any kind of sort of centrist or left-leaning fantasy that I think many people.
But don't you think that it was a valid expectation that they would perhaps honor? Let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Usman. I will come back to you. Ji, Usman, don't you think that overall the expectation that they would honor their promises as far as women and children were concerned was perhaps not that misguided?
Yes, I mean, one would think that they would learn from what is required to build a new society in pragmatic terms. Yes, they're ideological, but they have views on the ground. The question is, are they a revolutionary movement or are they a reactionary movement? And this is where I think people gauge it wrong. So revolutionaries would say that there's something glorious at the end, so let's work towards it. But and the reactionary says that there's a rupture in the past and we have to go and correct the past. So they're backward looking. And so I think that people mischaracterize it as being either too forward looking or too backward looking. And the practicalities that are being put on them right now is that they cannot look anywhere but immediately in front of them. Now, what does that mean?
So it would be practical for them then to realize that if they want the world to give them the money that they need, they will have to walk the talk.
You're absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And now I think that from what I gauge, looking at the West, is that it's really boiled down to a couple of issues. And at the top of that list is, are you going to protect women's rights? And the reason that this is important, pragmatically speaking, is that women are half of society. And when they're educated and empowered, it is the biggest driver for economic development. So even in Pakistan, it should be our foremost priority and we should be the vanguard among the community of nations saying that women empowerment is important, because it's going to be the biggest driver of our development too. Because if you look at the stats here, one big gap you see is that. But for Afghanistan, the point is, can they come around to this? Can they address this one issue? The reason that this is so important as well is that there is a lot of lobbying. There are strong feminist movements or liberal movements in the West that have anchored themselves in the point that this oppression is unacceptable, and they're fundamentally right about that. So if this one talking point can be cleared, that would already be a huge deal in the negotiations.
Right, and you would, see perhaps the Americans relenting if they saw that, right?
Agreed.
Musharraf, you've been hearing what Usman has to say. What are your comments on this? Of course, this is a huge point as far as women development, as far as the West is concerned. Of course, there has been some concern about the fact that there are double standards as far as the West is also concerned, and particularly with regard to Afghanistan and other areas and other countries. But of course, if we saw the Afghans relenting on the issue of women going to school, children going to school, and women rights generally, we would perhaps see a reaction.
Unfortunately, I think that the calculus of the Western powers, and particularly the United States, but frankly also countries like Russia, China, and I would go so far as to include Pakistan in that list. The principal interest that these countries have in the situation in Afghanistan is not, unfortunately, the condition of the Afghan people. Their principal interest in Afghanistan is the future of counterterrorism capability within the Afghan state, and the use of Afghan soil by groups that seek to damage and destroy their competitors or their enemies, so-called enemies, using the freedom that they enjoy or the safe havens they enjoy in Afghanistan. So I think if we want to see a major change in global and especially U.S. behavior towards Afghanistan, I think what they're looking for above all things is effective counterterrorism. And I think that women's rights are a very distant second or third, priority for all the countries involved. And I think, of course, that's very unfortunate. But that's the way that's the basis of the entire engagement with Afghanistan. And they never went in there to save the women of Afghanistan, and they're not going to suddenly change the listings of Afghan individuals or groups because girls are suddenly allowed to go to school or.
So what do you think? What do you think will change things significantly for the Afghani people in terms of the funds, unfreezing that we're talking about?
Look, this is really complicated, but there's a simple way to understand it.
Ji.
One of the most important elements of the Taliban, and I would say the most powerful element within the Taliban today, is the Haqqani network. They carry 4 ministries, including a couple of the really important ones. And as you know, the Haqqani network is listed by the UN Security Council 1267 Resolutions Committee. So barring a delisting of the Haqqani network, among many other individuals and groups in Afghanistan, it's hard to imagine that an Afghan government or state that is run by people who are on the 1267 sanctions list would be able to access what are the sovereign and fully owned funds of the Afghan people. Given that being the case, and given that we don't see any alternative to the Taliban, what we're going to have to come up with are shortcuts and solutions that bypass the Afghan government. Now, this is, of course, not only is it not ideal, but it's actually badly damaging for the sovereignty of Afghanistan, for the idea of a future Afghan state, for the functionality and the services that we all believe, I'm sure we all believe the Afghan people, especially its women and its children, deserve. For all of those reasons, it would be much better if there was a delisting and the sanctions were just lifted. But I don't see a realistic set of scenarios in which those sanctions will be lifted, because I don't see the Haqqani network being one that will be.
What do you think what do you think as far as this OIC meeting is concerned? Do you think, realistically speaking, we will have some concrete measures emerging from this meeting? Because Pakistan is certainly hopeful that that will happen. We've also had the foreign minister say that he sees that there is a certain change all over.
Well, I certainly think that the OIC meeting is important, because these OIC countries will have a chance to explicitly commit funds for the humanitarian mission in Afghanistan throughout this winter. So I think in terms of amassing those funds and identifying pathways of spending those funds, and I think largely it'll be the UN agencies and some of the large non-profits or charity organizations. From that perspective, I think we will make great progress. I think it's also important for OIC countries to demonstrate an ownership of Afghanistan, much in the way that so many other multilateral formations have since August 15th. But I don't see that the OIC will be able to manufacture a resolution to the issue of the sanctions. That really is a US government decision that will drive the solution on that front.
Right, okay, let me come back to you. Ji, Usman Sahab, do you agree? You think that as far as the US is concerned, unfortunately, you think that Musharraf Sahab is right? He's saying that, he doesn't see that is a decision that the US will take, of course, and the interest as far as within Afghanistan is, of course, different than what is said, as far as women's rights and children are concerned.
Yes, the question should really be framed by us in Pakistan in terms of crisis management and sustainable growth. For crisis management, what is being done, this initiative that is being led by the OIC, where Pakistan has always played an important role, is very good. I studied deeply crisis situations, and there are many ways to structure this. For example, you could have after the Gulf War, they had for the Oil for Food program for Iraq an account in escrow that was managed by a private bank, BNP Paribas, and that was very unfair to the Iraqi people. But at least the crisis management element post-war was done. That could be done here too. You can have escrow accounts, and there's trust funds and other ways to structure this. That's fine. But sustainable growth is what I really care about, because our young population in Afghanistan and even in Pakistan is growing up at such a fragile age with this trauma. They begin lives seeing it in this difficult circumstance. That is what I'm worried about, because what sort of baggage are they going to grow up with? Well, you already had the equivalent of millennials who are 40 or less have grown up with non-stop violence. When are we going to have the seeds, the green shoots of prosperity in our region? And for that, even the $9 billion that we talk about is just $225 per capita. That I can spend $225 in an hour. That it's just not that enough. So I want to see the structures of their economy as interlinked with their neighbors, including us, made sustainable.
Right. Okay. Let me. Unfortunately, we have to. We're running out of time. Musharraf, your comments on this sustainable growth that Usman is talking about, the fact that linked with, the way he put it. How do you see it? How long do you think will it take realistically also? Because it has its own effects for Pakistan also.
Of course, I think that Usman is absolutely right. That should be a priority, especially for Pakistan. But I would also say that that is a priority for Pakistan. Over the last couple of years in particular, there's been a growing elite consensus in Pakistan that the geostrategic and geopolitical pursuits that Pakistan has really been forced to make over the last 4 decades have not produced the strategic outcomes that are aligned with a strong, stable, and secure and prosperous Pakistani nation. And so this shift towards geoeconomics is perfectly aligned with the idea of individual microeconomic opportunity for the people of Afghanistan, the people of Pakistan. And I think increasingly importantly, when we have these conversations in Pakistan, there are 2 countries that we must mention every time, and those are Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. What we're seeing over the last year in particular is the Pakistani state, for all its foibles and mistakes in other arenas, including domestically, but there's been a great clarity about this geoeconomic future, and there's been a lot of diplomatic effort that's gone into it. I think the next steps for that are to revisit the nature of the Pakistani state's capability and its structure, and whether or not what we have today can service the kind of future that Usman's talking about. My very short answer to that question is it absolutely is not, and therefore we need a structured, organized, and very coherent dismantling of the existing systems of governance in the country and a rebuilding of state capacity to be able to deliver that kind of not just domestic but regional prosperity surge that I think could carry a population of 400 million Pakistanis by the middle of this century into a future that's much better than the past that we've had.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us. Usman, your last comment as far as this regional prosperity that we talk about. Of course, it's interlinked with all our regional partners and the way that the OIC is now coming together. Of course, that will be one of the things on the agenda for Pakistan particularly.
Yes, my final comment would be that Pakistan has done and continues to do an excellent job in terms of signaling that it is now a sober society. In the India-Pakistan standoff of 2019, we managed it with sobriety. The COVID crisis, we used a scientific basis to manage it with sobriety. And now in this 2021 fall of Kabul and post-war Afghanistan, we're engaging with sobriety, asking everyone else to come together so that we can deal in a sober manner with the humanitarian issue. And this sobriety, if we continue it crisis after crisis, we don't pick these battles, they are imposed on us. We are doing a good job. It is a lot of work mentally and psychologically, but that's why Pakistan is known as a resilient nation, because this is how we have to go about the 21st century.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us and your comments about resilience. Of course, we are a resilient nation, and we hope that our resilience will be tested less and less. We'll go back to our as far as our coverage of the OIC meeting is concerned after the news. Thank you so much for being with us.